Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Edge, and this is Jamie Hales, and we'll be in your service today. Steve Israel is handling streaming here with us. Lynn Israel is leading the singing, and Noel and Kevin McClooney are providing technical assistance at home. Thank you all so much for tuning in today for our live streaming service in light of the social distancing needed for reducing the spread of COVID-19. We are glad that we can keep in touch and support our community even if we can't be together in person. If you'd like an order of service, please look in the comments on the video or see the email sent this morning. We gather today to foster our understanding of our place in the universe, embracing the worth and dignity of all, supporting justice, equity, and peace in our world, accepting one another as we search for meaning, and respecting the connectedness of all life. Please take a moment to think of all your friends at MVUUC, greet them with a comment on Facebook, and remember that you can still reach out to them via email, phone, social media, or video chat. Physical distancing does not need to mean emotional distancing. Let us support one another. Visitors, as we are a diverse group with varying interests and beliefs, our services are varied in format, tone, and topic. We encourage you to attend or view several services to gain a good understanding of our congregation. If you'd like to receive our weekly email newsletter, please email us at news@mvuuc.org. MVUUC remains committed to supporting our members and friends during this difficult time of social distancing. For that reason, we are coordinating assistance with groceries, phone calls, and other needs. If this sounds like something that would be helpful to you, please send an email to sac@mvuuc.org with your name and what kind of assistance you would like to request. Now is the time for announcements. If you have an announcement, please add it as a comment on the the Facebook Live video, and we will read them aloud. Just as a reminder, both for announcements and later for joys and concerns, there is a 30-second delay between what we are saying here and when you receive it, so please bear with us as we have certain delays during the service. Thank you. Megan Ranciere reminds us that if anyone would like to make calls to members of the congregation, that you can contact her at sac@mvuuc.org. And our board president, Noel McClooney, also reminds us, please send pictures of fun things you are doing at home to news@mvuuc.org and help us keep in contact with one another. If there are no other announcements, then we will move on to the chalice lighting. The chalice will be lit today by Jamie Hales. Please join me in reading the words for the chalice lighting that appear as a comment on the Facebook Live video or in the order of service, which is also posted as a comment on the video. For every time we are lonely and we let someone be our friend, for every time we are disappointed and we choose to hope, we light this chalice. Now, please join us as we sing hymn number 194, Faith is a Forest.
Justice be my guide as I seek my way. Lead me into this tender day. Speak through me in all I do and say. Fortune and famine ride the swift winds of chance. Sorrow and pleasure seem united in dance. Web of life, may this thread I weave mingle compassion with all I believe. Mercy be my guide as I seek my way. Lead me into this tender day. Speak through me in all I do and say.
Good morning. I'm Jamie, and I'm going to read our opening words this morning, which are by Anne Frank. I can feel the suffering of millions. I can feel the suffering of millions, and yet, if I look up into the heavens, I think it will all come right, and that this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. In the meantime, I must uphold my ideals, for perhaps the time will come when I shall be able to carry them out.
Over the last few weeks, amid all the confusion and despair, I have to admit, I've actually enjoyed so many of the stories I've heard about people who are adjusting to being home suddenly and unexpectedly. ESPN had a great feature on some NBA players who are usually on the road this time of year, gearing up for the playoffs, and instead find themselves helping their kids with homework or setting up obstacle courses in the living room so the kids can play indoors. I love hearing the profound words of appreciation, not just for teachers and daycare workers and medical providers, but for people serving fast food or restocking shelves at the grocery store, as we realize how dependent we are upon their work. I love seeing the people who are using this time to do or learn things they've always wanted, and I love seeing people who recognize that they need to take this moment to stop, rest, and recuperate. More than anything, I loved a tweet I saw earlier this week from Kelly Howley, a contributing writer at New York Magazine and professor of creative writing at the University of Iowa. Howley wrote, quote, "My son just asked me if when I was little, I had to stay inside for COVIDs 1 through 18. If we look closely, there's actually some profound logic in that little boy's statement. Aside from his ability to count, at least up to 19, he does realize that this is something different in his short life. Something that he has never encountered. Something that has disrupted the normal patterns of his existence. But he doesn't assume that this is unique. In his mind, it is perfectly right to think that this has happened before, and that maybe his mom can shed some light on how to cope based on her own experiences. By asking this question, perhaps he is seeking reassurance that everything will soon be okay, that everything will soon be back to normal. The members of this congregation collectively have lived through a number of moments that seem to change everything. There are a few who were alive for Pearl Harbor or for the dropping of the first atomic bombs. There are more who were alive for the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Some of us remember where we were when the Challenger exploded. And almost every adult in this congregation can tell their 9/11 story. 3.5 years ago, my friend and colleague, Dr. Connie Begum, organized a conference at BGSU to mark the 15th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. My wife and I gave a joint talk that day about our 9/11 experience, because it occurred 4 days before our wedding in North Jersey. One of the themes that came up as we put our memories together and asked friends and family what they remembered was how many people thanked us that week for giving them something that took their minds off the news. To be honest, it didn't feel right to accept credit for planning our wedding a year in advance and that it just happened to occur on the Saturday after a national tragedy. But in the moment, we understood. For a few hours, we got dressed up, spent time together, celebrated, ate and drank, danced and sang. And did I mention that we had an open bar? For a few hours, it felt normal. In her book, The Terror Dream, Myth and Misogyny in an Insecure America, author Susan Faludi described American popular culture in the months following 9/11, including the media's obsession with stories of family planning and romance. Faludi felt that it was part of the nation's attempt to reclaim that which was good, to show that the good would always win in the end, to stress joy, celebration, and hope in the face of tragedy. For some of our friends and family, that wedding, our wedding, helped to fill the void created that week by the events in New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. It offered reassurance on the most personal level that we would all find a way to carry on, even in the face of terrorism, insecurity, and outright fear. Other people didn't look for their new normal in these big events like weddings and births. Some people found comfort in the eventual return of routine. Writing on their post-9/11 reactions as educators, Sumita Raghuram and Janet Marks noted, quote, that plunging into a near-normal routine of teaching was healing. Student attendance was normal. During the time that we were with them, it seemed to offer us and to our students an escape from the overwhelming pall outside. The students laughed. They were able to focus on the work. This suggested hope that we might return to normalcy soon. Deep down, however, we know that this is only one part of the story, one aspect of how we as a people adjust to major world-changing events. For a few days after 9/11, we didn't hear or see any planes flying overhead. When things returned to normal, when the planes took to the skies again, how long was it before we stopped noticing them? How long was it before we stopped being suspicious of them or wondering if they would reach their intended destinations? The new normal for many people was an awareness of possibilities, of threats they had not considered and now wished they could forget. And our reactions as a people include how we as a society adjusted. It included the new laws we passed, the regulations put in place to prevent the next 9/11, the wars we waged, the communities we profiled, the hatreds that already existed in our hearts and minds, now given full license to emerge. We have nearly 2 decades of history since 9/11 to look back, reflect, figure out what we got right and what we would change if we could. As individuals, as a community, as a society, we can see some of the healthy and unhealthy ways we worked towards achieving that sense of normalcy. With COVID-19, it's been a few weeks. We are all still living within the crisis, and there is so much we don't know yet. In other words, cut yourself some slack. None of us have all the answers right now, though I promise to try to sound like I do over the next 5 or 10 minutes. Within this congregation, I think many of us have taken the first, most important steps towards establishing our new normal: acceptance. Audra DeNicola, a mental health counselor in New York City, wrote this week about the importance of radical acceptance at a moment like this. Quote, "A common misconception about radical acceptance is that acceptance requires approval. It does not. Nor does radical acceptance require accepting defeat. Instead, it simply requires you to accept reality. I often remind patients that you don't have to like a situation or a feeling to accept it." DeNicola encourages us to move towards acceptance as a way of helping us properly assess our own situations and take action. For her, every ounce of energy we put into resisting the reality around us, of telling ourselves that this is not happening, is energy we could be devoting elsewhere. In encouraging us to begin this journey, she also pushes us to think about our feelings, our needs, right at this moment. We ask ourselves how we feel right now. What are our current needs? What things are causing us stress? What relationships are helping and hurting us in this moment? What and who we miss. DeNicola pushes us to do this so that we can take stock of what we have lost. Once we have accepted the reality of the situation and assessed where we are within it, We can take the time to grieve for what's been lost, whether this is an event, an opportunity, a routine, security, a job, or yes, even someone close to us. Obviously, there are different levels to grief here, but every single one of us has lost something in the last few weeks, and will undoubtedly lose more in the weeks and months to come. It isn't selfish or a distraction to grieve for ourselves and others. As with acceptance, it helps us to eventually achieve a state in which we can devote our energies elsewhere. Holding that grief inside, trying to ignore it, will only make it more difficult for us to take action. One of the most encouraging things that I saw in the first days when our normal routines were uprooted was how quickly some people began to take positive actions to look out for others. Within hours of the announcements about the closing of schools and the move towards physical distancing, a few people established a Facebook group, Mutual Aid Toledo, encouraging people to post their needs and try to connect them with others in the area who could help them. The group stressed that wherever possible, they would like to avoid money or paying someone for a service. Instead, it was more of a barter system, with the understanding that some folks might need to pay you back further down the line. Over the last few weeks, some of us on social media have surely seen neighbors developing color-coded signs in the window to let their neighbors know if they are in distress without endangering them through face-to-face contact. I've seen people alerting one another where they can find basic supplies in stock at local stores and offering to create homemade masks or hand sanitizer for senior citizens. Here in this congregation, we have encouraged people to share their needs and concerns every Sunday for years. And in this time of crisis, we have renewed our commitment to serving one another. As we navigate these times, some of us who are not used to asking for help or who are reluctant to do so may need to face the reality that we cannot handle this alone. That, as many people have pointed out, our physical isolation does not need to mean social isolation. As Unitarian Universalists, then, part of our new normal is indeed a restoration of old habits, perhaps undertaken in new ways, checking in with members of the congregation virtually, delivering meals or groceries contact-free, offering comfort through grief wherever we are. Speaking as someone who often has trouble asking for help, I'm reminded of the words of UU Reverend Elizabeth Wen. In her piece, Show Up Hungry, Wen talked about her feelings of inadequacy when she showed up to her UU singing group late, tired, hungry, grumpy, when she showed a side of herself that was less than her best. She wrote that, quote, being in community means offering care and being cared for, bringing my shiny self and my not so shiny self. Within our congregation, within our towns and counties, within our larger Northwest Ohio community, we should take heed of Wen's words. All of us will have opportunities to help others, and times when we need to ask for help. We will all have moments of strength and moments of weakness. For when it is our willingness to show all sides of ourselves, the good and the bad, that make us members of a real, loving community, in which we can support one another's journeys as best we can. As she wrote, quote, our communities of spirit are only real because we show up late expecting to be fed, because we both give and get, because we bring our tart and our sweet, our gifts and our struggles. We need lemon in the lentils, rice vinegar in the sushi, a squeeze of lime in the chelada, and some acid in our communities. Without it, our communities are superficial. With no acid, we are one note, monotone. Our vulnerabilities, our bits of brokenness, bring life to our relationships. Now, I am not looking at the situation and the results of it through rose-colored glasses. I am perfectly aware that, as with previous emergencies, that some of our vulnerabilities and brokenness come through in ways that hinder progress. That this emergency is being used to demonize specific groups of people, and that some folks are suffering more than others. We've seen physical and verbal attacks on Asians and Asian Americans. Just this week, we saw 2 French doctors interviewed on live television arguing that Africa should serve as a laboratory for testing potential COVID-19 vaccines. And we know that poor people and people of color in this country are more likely to be in service jobs that are suddenly considered essential, more likely to catch the disease, less likely to have health coverage, and more likely to die from it. That brings us to the long-term project of healing. Everything I've talked about so far encompasses how we are dealing with this moment right now and helping one another to make it together to the next moment on an individual level. It is possible to both live in this moment and support one another through the current crisis while also shaping our aspirations of the world we want to see emerge from this moment in history. I'm reminded of how President Reagan lauded the Challenger astronauts while also assuring us that we would continue to carry on their mission. I'm reminded of how many advances in civil rights, workers' protections, and key aspects of the social safety net came from our shock and grief over the martyrdom of activists, the senseless loss of lives in workplace accidents, and enormous events like the Great Depression, revealing how vulnerable we can be. Normal, as a concept, is whatever we choose to make it. Yes, it will be comforting somewhere down the line when I can run to the store without significant fear of becoming ill, when I can hug a friend I haven't seen in a while, or watch a movie or play with a group of people. It will be nice to see my students face to face again, to visit my family in another state, or 100 other things that many of us took for granted just a few short weeks ago. But maybe our normal moving forward will include a recognition that many people among us cannot take those things for granted. Maybe we will pay more attention to people who are immunocompromised, for whom every day can carry the risks we see right now. Maybe we will pay more attention to people with mental illness, who feel socially distanced every day and sometimes have trouble reaching out for the people and resources they need. Maybe we will think about those who are isolated, living on their own, and how to create support systems that will reach them where they are. And maybe, just maybe, we will also look at the best responses around us right now. The ones we celebrate in the news or on social media, the ones that represent shiny examples of our shared humanity, and find ways to recreate them on a daily basis. It always strikes me as odd in times of crisis when we celebrate groups of people or laud their heroism, but shy away from thinking, how can we do that every day? How can we create structures that make this simply a part of life, rather than an act of charity or an unusual accomplishment? Some will argue that doing so will only politicize a tragedy. as if politics has no bearing on where we are right now. But I would argue that now is precisely the time to look around and see the type of nation and world we want to live in. Now is the time to begin questioning the logic that poverty, unemployment, lack of access to health care are part of our normal and have been for far too long. All of us may not agree on the solutions, but the vast majority of us can look at our current situation and at least agree on the problems. In recent years, we often lack the ability to even agree on that much. So perhaps there are signs of hope amid the current emergency. Yesterday was the 52nd anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Most people, in thinking about his last speech, remember the part where he seemed to predict his own death and assured his audience that as a people, they would still reach the promised land. Today, yes, we can take inspiration from that rhetoric, from the way that he defined success as a group venture not based on whether he had the opportunity to see it come to fruition. But we can also celebrate that speech for challenging inequalities in his own time. We can celebrate it for encouraging striking sanitation workers in Memphis to continue their fight for a living wage and safer working conditions. We can celebrate it for bringing our attention to people we generally ignore and placing their concerns front and center. We can celebrate it because, for Dr. King, it was normal and morally right to judge our actions and our society by how we treat the least among us. Throughout his dozen years in the public spotlight, King repeatedly warned the nation of the dangers of returning to business as usual. In our own time, let us work together to create a new normal that uplifts us all and represents the best of our aspirations. May it be so. As for the connection to UU principles, I hope that today's talk, of course, reminds us of our interconnectedness, of the ways that we are already working together throughout the current crisis to look around, to recognize those who are in need, to help even if it's from a distance. But I also hope that we think about this in terms of our responsible search for truth. That much of what I've been trying to talk about today is also rooted in us looking around and seeing what are the things that we take for granted in the society. What are the conditions that we think are unchanging but perhaps aren't? What are some different ways that we can look at the current situation and think moving forward of responsible ways to change how we might respond to it or to something similar that happens in the future? Taken together, I think the current crisis is a great reminder to us as Unitarian Universalists of our long legacies in various movements for social justice. That not only, of course, bring us back to our sense of interconnectedness, but also remind us of the inherent worth and dignity of all people from all walks of life. Now, I'm going to invite Jamie Hales to lead us in our reading for today.
Hello. Our reading today is by Erica A. Hewitt, and it's titled The Smallest, Biggest Number. Erica is also the UUA's Minister of Worship Arts. I serve as pastor of a 60-member congregation in Maine, and every time I help decide whether the weather's bad enough to cancel worship, I know that someone's going to grouse. The same weather can elicit responses from, "There's hardly any snow," to, "I can't possibly clear my driveway." 60 people looking at the same roads don't just have different opinions, but also a multiplicity of perspectives. Most of the leaders I know are being forced to translate that decision-making pressure to an unknown, potentially lethal virus whose patterns we can neither predict nor fully yet understand as it makes its way through a country of nearly 330 million people. It's no wonder that those leaders are crumbling, not because of overblown fears of COVID-19, but because it's distressing to make decisions that have vast, nearly unimaginable consequences for the people we love. Should we ask people to come to work? Should we still hold our event knowing that participants will receive soul nourishment but risk physical exposure? Should our families take this once-in-a-lifetime trip? Every should we is haunted by the ghost of what we'll wish we had known. Ethical culture leader Lois Kellerman has said that the smallest number in ethics is 2. I believe, moreover, that the most ethically driven decisions prioritize the most vulnerable members of any given community. Moral decision-making hinges not on the I and not even on the interconnected web of we, but on the most fragile strands in the web. As our leaders make tough decisions, terrible by nature because there are no good decisions in the chaotic fear of what looms, our communities are being tested for their tolerance for uncertainty, as well as how much grace they choose to extend toward the leaders making those high-stakes but value-driven decisions. Our communities, bless them, hold them, keep them, are also beginning to absorb the lonely, painful cost of social distancing. If 2 is the smallest number in ethics, it's also the smallest seed of certainty, the way not to get lost. Because the ultimate test, when the fear and grief finally give way to clarity, will be knowing ourselves by how well we cared for one another.
Our world is one world, which is number 134 in the hymnal, and you should be able to click on a link to get a copy of the music. Our world is one world. What touches one affects us all. The seas that wash us round about, the clouds that cover us, the rains that fall. Our world is one world. The thoughts we think affect us all. The way we build our attitudes with love or hate we make a bridge or wall. Our world is one world. In ways of wealth affect us all. The way we spend the
Our closing words today are with faith to face our challenges, from UU minister Reverend Gary Kowalski. With faith to face our challenges, with love that casts out fear, with hope to trust tomorrow, we accept this day as the gift it is, a reason for rejoicing. Please join me in reading the words for extinguishing our chalice that can be found as a comment on the Facebook Live video or in the order of service, which is also posted as a comment on the video. As we extinguish this chalice, may we find in each waking day scores of blessings and opportunities for positive change. We've moved the offertory to the end of our service because when you click on the PayPal link provided in the Facebook Live video comment section, you will lose connection to our live feed. We are still counting on your pledge payments and donations to help sustain and strengthen this congregation that is so important to all of us, supporting our efforts to be a community of love, truth, justice, and service. After the service, please feel free to continue to actually join our video Google chat by clicking on the link provided and continue discussing the topic in the comments on Facebook. Then please click on the PayPal link to donate. And now, let us sing Go With a Song in Your Heart. You can find the comment in the Facebook Live video or in the order of service, which is also posted as a comment in the video.
Go with a song in your